we have the day's second panel, which is on the very important topic of self-custody. They will talk about the suitability of self-custody for different types of users and best practices. They are experts within security, innovation, Bitcoin, and ETFs. So first up, our moderator, Bitcoin podcaster, Luna! And we have CFO of Satoshi Labs and co-founder of Invity, Štěpán. Uherík! And the head of X-Trackers, digital products and partnerships, Barbara Schlyter. CTO of Ledger, Charles Guillemet. Last but not least, CEO and co-founder at Wizard Sardine, Kevin Loaec.
Okay, this is going to be fun, and I hope that we are all going to learn a lot here. I don't know if you realize, but we have a panel with two titles. It's Self-Custody is for everyone, and Self-Custody is not for everyone. As I believe we will learn more if we focus in the second one, I want to start with that one. Self-custody is not for everyone. Kevin, isn't it?
You know, I'm working in self-custody for all these years on Bitcoin, so I believe right now you have the tools, no matter who you are, no matter how non-technical you are, to have self-custody. And again, is Bitcoin for everyone?
Who wants to pick it? Charles, isn't it?
Oh, I think Bitcoin is for everyone. There is no doubt about that. And in terms of self-custody, I think this is our mission in terms of industry, Bitcoin industry, to make self-custody for everyone. Today, there are some barriers, some friction around that, because it might be a little bit difficult, sometimes a bit cumbersome. And this is where we need to improve the user experience. And this is what we are trying to do at Ledger. We never compromise with security while trying to improve the UX. But the real revolution brought by Bitcoin is permissionless money. And permissionless money is made possible by the decentralized consensus that we have on Bitcoin and by self-custody. With self-custody, you don't have to ask the permission to anyone to own your value. And this is the true value of Bitcoin for me.
Barbara, you are working more on the other side, as we would say, because you are more involved with ETCs, ETFs. So, yeah, I'm very interested. Is self-custody for everyone or not really?
It's a very good question. I agree partly with what the two of you said, right? I think for Bitcoiners, right, self-custody is the go-to solution. I agree that there's friction in the system. And as of today, I would say clearly no, self-custody is not for everyone, as probably people would expect me to say. I think a proof for that is the recent launch of the US spot Bitcoin ETFs. As probably all of you know, on January 10th this year, the SEC approved spot Bitcoin ETFs. After 10 years rejecting these proposals, they finally approved them. And since then, we've seen a really phenomenal product start for these US products. We've seen $15 billion of inflows, some of the most successful ETF launches ever across all asset classes. And we also see, when we look at who's investing into these ETFs, we see that it's actually a lot of retail investors, not as many institutions yet, but a lot of retail investors that clearly do have access to self-custody, do have access to investing spot into crypto, but they nonetheless chose to invest into the Bitcoin ETFs, which I think just lets the market speak for that question. Clearly, there's a lot of investors that are currently preferring to invest in a financial product such as a Bitcoin ETP.
So you're saying that it's not even your opinion, it's the market opinion, and it is proving it by how the ETF went. Okay, I'll come back to that. Štěpán?
Yeah, so in my opinion, self-custody is for everyone, and as was said, it's a foundation of Bitcoin. And let me maybe put it into more philosophical dimension. So we've heard it's a market, we will decide, but the philosophical dimension is that self-custody is for everyone because there is no authority who wants to approve someone. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your origin, it doesn't matter your experience or previous experience with Bitcoin. You can simply join, and all you need is the internet connection. So I think technically, self-custody is and must be for everyone because that's the only thing that makes Bitcoin unique, fully decentralized. That's it.
Yeah, I think if not self-custody, why Bitcoin at the end? What's the value of Bitcoin if you don't self-custody? I think this is the true value of Bitcoin. I agree that the market is peaking and the ETF Bitcoin spot is quite successful now, for now, but I think we as an industry must make sure that it's as easy as possible to self-custody. And at the end, it's not that complicated. We need to do the education, we need to provide the tools. We already have some tools, but we need to continue in that direction.
Thank you, Charles, because this is what I wanted to ask next. Learning about markets, maybe, or thinking that markets are telling us what is self-custody. I want to ask Kevin, does it make sense to, quote unquote, own Bitcoin if you don't have the keys?
Right. There's so many depth at which we can go, and even what is self-custody? Many of the people here and in the room probably believe that self-custody is basically owning your keys. Technically, that's not enough. Having your keys is not enough. You also need to run your own node. If you're not running your own node, you're trusting someone else to tell you if you really have, the actual Bitcoins. Otherwise, you might be running on a different chain. You might be lied to about what actually your keys are. If somebody sends you money, you're basically relying on this trusted node that you're connected to actually tells you how much money you really have. So self-custody is not about just keys. It's one step, but that's not yet, owning your Bitcoin. So does it make sense to own your Bitcoin? I mean, yeah, of course. You should own your keys. You should run your own node. You should have it the way it's designed, completely decentralized that we talked about. You should not trust anyone else. Otherwise, do you really own Bitcoin? So if you have keys, but you don't run your own node, is it really different from having an ETF?
Yeah, I think you touch a good point, which is that self-custody is not only about having the knowledge of the keys, but it's much more than this. And I think at the end, the idea of self-custody is a spectrum, and this spectrum is really a spectrum of trust. On one extreme, you have you completely trust someone else to own your Bitcoin, and you are in the ETF world. And on the other extreme, you don't trust anyone. And not trusting anyone is very complicated because you will have to generate your keys on your own. You will have to build your own wallet. This is not something easy. You will have to learn how to code. You will have to trust your compiler. Do you trust your compiler? Then maybe you will have to build your own compiler. Do you trust your electronic? Maybe you will have to build electronic. I mean, this is a spectrum. If you really want to be completely trustless, it's almost impossible. You would have to recreate thousands of years of science and technology. It's something not really doable. And on the other extreme, you completely trust someone else to hold your value. So you have to choose where you are in the spectrum. But at the end, there will be always some trade-off and some trust in someone else. And it's up to the user to decide where the cursor is on the spectrum, I think.
Barbara, you said that market is proving that self-custody is not for everyone. So I want to ask you, do you think that people buying ETFs and ETCs, do you think, or do they believe they own Bitcoin, or do you think they know exactly what they own?
It's a good question, right? The ownership question is always a difficult one. It depends, obviously, on what kind of financial products you're looking at. Most of the US products and also the European products are one-to-one physically backed products. They custody the Bitcoins in institutional-grade third-party custodians, one or more custodians in most cases. And then the assets, the custodian should, if it's a well-structured product, should segregate the assets, right? They shouldn't be on the balance sheet of the custodians, but they should be segregated for the benefit as an entitlement for the investor, right? I think then it is, if you then have the entitlement, right, you might not be physically able to access the product, but you have the entitlement to access it, the legal right, the legal title to it, then I think it comes close. And I think it is not just the ownership question, right? It's a lot of different questions that investors need to look at, right? It's the ownership question, it's a legal question, a regulatory question, can they even invest into spot Bitcoin? Many institutional investors cannot. It's convenience questions, it's a tradability question for them, integrating it into their operating model. So it is one consideration, this ownership question. And then many people do not know, but actually European crypto ETPs, many of them do have a physical delivery option. So if you would buy, for example, our Bitcoin ETC, you could go to the issuer, and there's certain conditions, right? I mean, it's still regulated financial industry, regulated financial products, but you can send your wallet if it fulfills certain criteria, and you can expect and you can ask for a physical delivery.
Okay, so let's say that they evaluate all kinds of costs that it involves the owning or quote-unquote owning, but for sure, even if it's backed and checked, they accept that they will have a layer of legality. So in the worst case scenario, there will be this trusted third party that is legality, and they will have to go there with lawyers and so on to claim what they were promised.
Yes.
Okay. Štěpán, I'm going to do you a question. I would like to extend it to everybody because Charles introduced a concept about the spectrum. And yeah, this title is very good because we can play a lot with it, but it creates like a binary option. Self-custody or not self-custody, a bit of Hamlet, no? Do you think that's the case? Or do we have a spectrum in between? Does Bitcoin allow us to have other kinds of custody? What would you say about that?
I will be very honest here. I think there is no spectrum. There's only you own your Bitcoin or you do not own it. And yes, if there is a spectrum, it's a spectrum on how much you do not own your Bitcoin. And I would be very careful about market or letting market choose, because as we know from the statistics, only around 2% of the users really use, for example, hardware wallets. So I think we cannot simply let the market choose, because people are usually not informed. They don't realize the risk. They simply want to rely on a third party, and they don't really understand that Bitcoin is something else than just having a financial instrument. So that's why I must be really strict, and I must say there is no spectrum. You own your Bitcoin or you do not own it.
Interesting. Kevin and Charles, I want to hear your thoughts on what he just said.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short because I can speak for hours about this. Wow, I mean, I can start with like a lot of questions just to make people think, right? Let's say if we go from this, do you own your Bitcoin or do you not? Let's say the very common 2 out of 3 multi-signature where you have one key with an external provider. Many companies do that, you know, like Unchained, BitGo, whatever. I mean, there is many of those. Is this still self-custody then or no? Because you own 2 keys. So technically you control the coins and they alone cannot spend your coins. So is this still self-custody for you?
It's a question on me.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very deep discussion, and you're totally right that there might be some, let me say, spectrum between these setup, but from my perspective, it is not, because basically you have shared with a third party, and you rely on a third party with this private key.
All right, yeah, I'm with you on that. Then, okay, this is a bit more technical, and I'm sorry, I'm not gonna deep dive into technical stuff, but basically what we're doing right now on Liana, our wallet, is that you can actually change this model and have, you know, the completely sovereign key yourself. You have the only valid key in your wallet, so you have like perfect self-custody in that thing. But if you don't use your wallet for a year, directly in the Bitcoin script, we have this time lock, and then you could potentially have a key from a custodian becoming valid after a year. So at this moment in time, technically I am fully sovereign, I have, you know, actual self-custody, But if I don't use my wallet for a year, then an external party is able to recover my key by themselves. So is my wallet still self-custody, or is it, a time spectrum in that case? We could look at an axis, right? But yeah, there is like a lot of things that we can think about. And I really like there is no spectrum, but it's very difficult to see that. There is also the case where you have the one custodian, and people like to separate also self-custody or full custodian, but you have everything in between when you might have a multi-sig of different custodian, and none of them has the control, right? They need to collude with each other, things like that.
And if I may follow up on this, because this is very important to kind of mention that there are many layers of the security. For example, these covenants, that's very good. Basically, it's just the conditions of spending, and I think this might be a good idea, but it's just another level and layer of security. And from Tresor's perspective, since I'm here from the Satoshi Labs, we understand that some users struggle because they are not informed, they are afraid of having the full responsibility for the private key. We understand it, and that's, for example, why we announced the multi-share backup, and that's something, that's the way how we would like to approach it. But the key point is that it's the user who really controls the moment of where the private keys are created, and you can really decide how to manage this private key. But I think we all agree on the fact that private keys management is a big topic. It is.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting debate, and if you only consider a single sig setup and you define self-custody along with the idea of who knows the key, who doesn't, who controls it, and who doesn't, then in this very setup, it can be completely binary, as you said. Are you the only one to know your key, to generate your key, and so on, or not? But this is a very tiny definition of what self-custody can be in general, because if you consider different setup in different organizations with multi-sig and so on, and also the knowledge of the key is something important, but I go back to this idea of trust. Having only a key, having the knowledge of the key is not enough to own your Bitcoin, because you will need to be able to spend them at some point and so on, and then who do you trust in order to create the signature and so on, and I think it should come into your mind when you think about self-custody. This is why I think there is a spectrum in this idea of self-custody. I totally agree with what you said. The difference is just how you define self-custody. And for me, self-custody is something more multidimensional and something that is not only about single sig setup and so on.
Charles, you introduced in Ledger last year, Ledger Recover, which is, in my opinion, if we accept that there is a spectrum, it's kind of like connecting self-custody with the ETFs custody. And I want to ask if you agree with this, because it's kind of introducing a legal layer on self-custody. It's kind of a safe self-custody, but you introduce some agents who have power over your Bitcoin in some legal situations. Would that be the case, do you think?
It's a very, very good question. So, for instance, if you use Ledger Recover, you generate your keys with your wallet. You are controlling your keys with your wallet. You don't need anyone to spend your money. So in that regard, we are still in the same setup, still in self-custody. But when it comes to your backup, what we introduced is an option for users who want to have a safe net, just in case they completely lose their 24 hours. And the way we have implemented it is like a Shamir secret sharing setup, where you have three different entities who own those shards. If you are one of those entities, you can do anything with the shards. But in order to recover your wallet, just in case you completely lose your 24 words, you will have to prove your identity to those different entities so that you gather the shards in order to reconstruct them inside your wallet. So in this setup, there is no entity alone that can do anything to reconstruct, to get access to your wallet. And furthermore, we are adding some hardware, secure hardware in those different entities. And even those entities would have to break this hardware in order to be able to access to the shards. So in this case, I agree, this setup is we are entering in the spectrum that I was mentioning before. But from my standpoint, you are still in self-custody. We are just providing an option for users to have a recovery mechanism just in case they lose their 24 words. But in the whole life of the wallet, the only person who can spend the Bitcoin is the user. And there is an element of trust because you are trusting this third party to not collude and not break the HSM in order to access to your wallet. But we are still in the spectrum of self-custody, and we are in the self-custody part from my standpoint.
But there is like a grain of legality in it, no? That maybe before, like if that person gets asked by some legal procedure to give away his properties, those funds could be taken. So there is, it's in the side of the spectrum, self-custody, but entering in more the ETF side of things, no?
There is a legality part, I agree. If you have, like, because all the three entities are located in different states, in order to avoid one state asking for the access for the shards. But if you have like several governments that requires access to this different backup, it would be technically possible to reconstruct. So yes, there is an element of trust into this legality layer, definitely.
Barbara, I want to ask you all now, because I believe it's very interesting who is here in this panel, and I think that we're all very lucky, because we have from the more legal side of things, no? Then we enter the self-custody side, even with some connection points, as we were talking now, but with Ledger and Trezor. And then Liana is kind of representing and with Jardine, the advanced custody. Mm-hmm. And this is probably, some people will find ETFs great, some people will find Liana amazing, but this in the spectrum is completely opposite sides. So I'm sure that there is risks and benefits of each of the solutions you represent. So I would like, starting from your point of view, what do you think is the risk of having an ETF and the benefit of it?
I'll start with the benefits. Yeah, so ETPs generally are a massively successful financial instrument, right? They've grown successively since the 1990s. That's when the first ETF was launched. We've had a tremendous growth, around $12 trillion in global assets under management in ETP vehicles. Why are ETPs so successful? It's because of the product structure, right? It gives you transparency to the underlying, you know what you're investing in. It's highly liquid instruments and regulated instruments, right? And that's why they've grown so immensely in the past. When it comes particularly to Bitcoin or crypto ETPs, I think it's three primary benefits that investors have. It's the first one we discussed before. It's the ease of access, the convenience, right? On that spectrum, Charles, that you laid out, right? It's on the far right, I guess, in that sense, where you trust someone, right? And you kind of abstract the complexity of custody, you abstract the complexity of trading the underlying asset, of trading Bitcoin, and you give that to a trusted issuer that contracts with various third parties. So that's the first benefit, simple access, convenience. The second one is efficiency, right? Some of you might have seen that when these products were launched, there was actually, prior to the launch, a fee war happening and massive margin compression in these products. These are now competitively priced, I would argue, right? Maybe some of you might not argue with that, but the costs of these products are between 20, 30, 40 basis points. And then for the total cost of ownership, right, you have an ongoing product fee, but you also have a spread, right? Also, if I want to buy spot Bitcoin, I have to buy it somewhere, right? And I do pay that spread. And with an ETP, you have the advantage that it's professional, authorized participants, professional market makers that do trade that Bitcoin, that do buy that Bitcoin, right? And I, as a retail investor, might not have access to these liquidity venues. I might not have the knowledge how to trade that, but in an ETP structure, you also outsource that complexity to that product structure.
Yeah, but these days, OTC desks are out of liquidity a little bit for Bitcoin.
Sorry, what do you say?
These days, OTC desks are out of liquidity because of the high buy pressure that you have on
Exactly.
from any
So the
ETF.
liquidity of an ETP is always equals the liquidity of the underlying market plus any liquidity that an AP is willing to take on their own book, right? But the advantage is that the APs can access various different liquidity venues, right? That many, both retail and institutional investors might not always have access to. And then the third benefit is the reliability of the structure, right? ETPs are well-known, well-regulated structures, and investors can trust in the continuity of these products, even in the case of disruption events. You asked about risks as well, and of course there's always, right, there's risks related to the underlying, right? My compliance function would probably wants me to say, highlight, some of the risks of the underlying. I don't think we have to discuss them here, like the volatility of the assets, for example. But then it's, I guess, primarily about the main risk is kind of how well is the product structured, and third-party risks, right? Because you have various different agents in an ETP structure that fulfill different roles, right? That legality that you asked before about, right? Can you really get your entitlement in a worst-case scenario, for example, in an insolvency event of a cryptocurrency custodians? I think these are the main risks that investors need to look out for.
So we have to understand that there is plenty of third parties involved.
Yes, this.
Okay. Štěpán, self-custody, risks and benefits.
Yeah, well, it really depends on the use case, and I think we haven't mentioned that for self-custody, let's make it simple. So it's for someone who wants to own the Bitcoin for long term, and is really serious about Bitcoin and want to control the private keys. In that case, let's speak about hardware wallets. So I will focus on the hardware wallet since we are the producer, Trezor. I think one of the biggest benefits is, of course, the control. So you really control your private keys, and yeah, why not? In the next step, you can run your own node. But it's a really important thing. The second thing is that it's simple. I think usually people claim that ETFs are easy to start with, you don't need the technical knowledge, but it's the same with the hardware wallet. It's really simple to start with. You don't need to provide your KYC, you don't need to fulfill the investment questionnaire, you don't need to wait for being approved. No, just buy a hardware wallet, and with 3 clicks, you have your self-custody ready. Then, next, I think one of the big benefits is that these days, I think all important services, financial services such as exchanges, buy Bitcoin, are already integrated into the hardware wallet ecosystem. So you can even start with the Bitcoin by buying a hardware wallet, and then you can set up your buy or even DCA in your wallet, or you can exchange your shitcoins to Bitcoins directly in the hardware wallet ecosystem. And I think that that's great. And it was already mentioned, the benefit of the self-custody in a hardware wallet is that you do not pay any recurrent fees. So basically, you pay once, you cried once, and that's it. On the other hand, the biggest benefit of a hardware wallet, so you control the private keys, is at the same time the biggest challenge. And I admit it, it's like an industry challenge we must face, and that's why we try to really not only educate people more, but to provide more services and setups, such as Shamir Backup, the multi-share. And today we announced a new service. It's called Trezor Expert, because we understand that there are people out there who want to start, but they need help. So we can book a session with an expert who will introduce you into the self-custody in a hardware wallet.
You were making faces when he was talking, when he was saying that it's simple. What do you know that we don't?
Yeah, it was your second point, right? I was going to ask, isn't that simplicity misleading, right? Because I agree, if I want to order a hardware wallet, yes, I go on a provider's website, I do order the hardware wallet, right? But aren't there then many follow-up questions that will come, and maybe with strong consequences and not positive consequences if I don't do that learning journey before? And should it be so simple, right? Because you put that reliance then on the user to educate themselves beforehand, to understand, and not just buy the hardware wallet, test it, and then, oh, unfortunately, I didn't get it right. I don't know if you were here yesterday. There was a presentation by another hardware wallet provider. There was Tales from Customer Support, I think, the title of the presentation. And they said 50%, half of all the questions they get, are basic Bitcoin questions. What's a wallet? I didn't save my recovery key. What do I do now? How do I delete my account? How do I delete my transactions, right? Questions they should have known before, maybe, before they bought such a product.
I don't think it contradicts the idea of simplicity. I think it's a little bit the same as in the beginning of the internet. We were like, what's this thing? It's complicated and so on. It was not complicated, it's just new. And as it's new, it can create some fears. And as you said, there are plenty of questions, plenty of education to be done. But at the end, it's simple. Buying a hardware wallet, generating your seed and using it, it's simple. We just users don't know how it works. Buying an ETF is not that simple. You have to click plenty of things, doing plenty of KYC, providing a lot of documents regarding your taxes and so on, and it takes forever. It takes a long time. It's not simple. We are used to do it because every time you use a financial instrument, you have to go through those controls and so on. We are used to do it, but it's not simple. For wallets, new users are not used to do it, but it's simple. I think there was a difference here.
Maybe just to conclude, it's different, maybe. Let's say it's different, but both solutions can be simple, but in its own way. But hardware wallets are really easy to use, in my opinion.
To me, I think we're talking about a different thing here. Like, there is Bitcoin, Bitcoin is money. ETF is not money. An ETF is a financial instrument. And I really believe that most of the people buying into the ETF, they don't care. They are just seeing a ticker. They could be NVIDIA, it could be Bitcoin, it could be anything. And when they buy, an ETF with NVIDIA in it, they don't care about, how NVIDIA works. They just want an ETF because it's, this package thing. It's great. They just buy it, they hold it, they sell it when they want. But it's only because they are looking at just basically number go up, right? But this is not Bitcoin to me. It's just a ticker. It's just a financial instrument. Of course, they don't care about how Bitcoin works. Of course, they are not going to contact the ETF provider to know what a UTXO is. They don't care. Maybe they buy NVIDIA and they don't know what an ASIC is. They've never seen a GPU in their life. I don't know. So to me, it's a very different thing. And of course, if you see Bitcoin as money and financial freedom kind of thing, you need to be in control. I mean, this is obvious. You can't ask for freedom if you give all of your money to a provider somewhere that's in a complete jurisdiction that could, ban Bitcoin tomorrow. So there is a completely different view as well of what we're talking about. Self-custody of what? Self-custody of number go up. Sure, you could use a hardware wallet, keep it for 20 years, dump the Bitcoin later, or buy an ETF and dump it later and just hope for the best. But I think Bitcoin is much more than that as well. So if you want to use it, for freedom, for just because you don't believe in the system, or because you just want control over your money and your lives, you can't use an ETF for that, or any kind of custodian even, I would say. Yeah. So just wanted to say that maybe there is an argument about two different things here that are not really comparable.
Agree. The purpose of why investors might invest into a Bitcoin ETF might be different why a Bitcoiner is holding their assets in a self-custodial wallet, right?
Totally. And buying an ETF means being exposed to Bitcoin value, while owning Bitcoin is very different to your point. Owning Bitcoin is about permissionless money, is about self-sovereignty, it's about freedom. I think Bitcoin is a revolution of ownership. It completely redefines the idea of ownership. You don't have to ask the permission to anyone to own your value and to use it, while buying an ETF means only being exposed to Bitcoin value, and this is completely different.
But then for your Bitcoin vision, wouldn't you say it is beneficial that there is more mainstream adoption, that it is maybe a first step for both retail and institutional investors to get access to that asset class, to start that education journey, right? And that they don't have to go full in first, but that they can start to get exposure to start that learning journey?
Totally. I think the ETF journey that we saw in the past months has put a lot of light on Bitcoin, and it allows people to get interested in what Bitcoin is and so on. And we have plenty of people who are buying the ETF, and maybe in the future they will understand what Bitcoin is and buy real Bitcoin and own it.
However, on the other hand, I think this is like the ETFs and the whole industry is creating honeypots. And I think this is not something which is beneficial for the Bitcoin. And on the other hand, we don't know what can happen when we hear that everybody, or pretty, I think, except Fidelity, is using Coinbase. I'm not sure that this is like a good something for Bitcoin. So I would be aware of this, and I think it can be a significant risk. And I hope this hypothesis that people will start with ETF and they will understand that Bitcoin is much more. I hope it's true, but I'm not sure. I think we must really support and continue in educating people and informing them, because it can have an opposite effect. So people will start with ETFs and they will say, well, that's enough, it works for me. And they will never understand how Bitcoin really works. So I would be careful about these centralized honeypots.
We're running out of time, and I thank you very much because I'm really enjoying this conversation. I would love to have 30 minutes more. But we have like 40 seconds each of you, because we all have this friend who in 2024 decided to start stacking Bitcoin or start exposing to Bitcoin. If that friend convinces you to sit down and teach them, what would be your advice for them in this year? How would you recommend him to start? With you, Štěpán.
Yes, so I would ask about the use case, if it's long-term, if it's real Bitcoin, and this person is really honest to really go beyond the Bitcoin. I would say a hardware wallet. In that case, a Trezor, of course. I won't surprise you.
And it's surprising if you would say something else.
Absolutely. Multi-share backup, that's my new favorite set and way how to manage my private keys. And if you're not sure how to start, Trezor Expert, that's it.
Barbara?
Yeah, I would say same start, ask for the reasons, right? Is it simple exposure to the asset class, or does the person really want to learn about Bitcoin? If it's simple exposure to the asset class, obviously a crypto ETP is the one I would propose here. But then if it's also about learning about the asset class, I would absolutely also recommend to do spot investments, right? To really do that user journey, to understand and feel it and get tangible experience with the asset class.
Charles?
When I discuss with these friends who want to suddenly buy Bitcoin, first of all, I talk about Bitcoin for a long time, so why now? But I like to start with monetary policy. I like to explain why Bitcoin has been created in the first place, why it's different, comparing it with the fiat standard. It's always important to remind those. Then explaining the true power of self-custody and being the real owner of the asset. And then sit down and create a wallet with a ledger device, obviously, a stacked device, and explaining the different risk and the different mistakes to avoid, because there are bad guys out there who tries to trick you into doing bad things, and this is important to explain these things.
Kevin, you have 20 seconds.
Yeah, definitely starting with hardware wallets. I would not recommend them a Trezor because you guys don't implement Miniscript yet, so please implement Miniscript. And then, yeah, set up through, a Liana or whatever wallet to make sure they will not lose their coins even if they are like beginners. And you can do that in self-custody. You don't have to be afraid. There are models where you can really protect someone against loss even without going through ETFs or trusted parties.
And if I can add, I would remember them that testnet exists, and they don't have to be losing coins while trying. They can use testnet and learn by doing. Thank you very much. It was an excellent conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.